Well, that's everybody that's in here so far. Maybe we'll have some others join us as we get going. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Petter Johansson. I am a Lutheran pastor. I'm on the staff of Wisconsin Council of Churches as the volunteer coordinator for the Afghan refugee response. I've been on staff since December, just doing my best to connect churches to the people doing the work and helping to just keep things moving. There are a lot of folks that have been hard at work to serve all of the Afghans that were at Fort McCoy and now being resettled in Wisconsin. And we've got a lot of folks in our churches that have been wanting to help. And it's not always so easy for the people trying to help to actually get in touch with the people doing the work because they're so busy. So that's allowed us to kind of play that role of beginning those conversations and making those connections as they are most helpful. One of the things we've been wanting to do more of is to share information and opportunities for our volunteers and our congregations to learn more about Afghan culture and Islam and to just grow in ways that allow them to be a more welcoming person, a more welcoming neighbor, to help their churches sort of change that narrative around immigrants and refugees and people from other cultures. And so we have today an opportunity with Janan Najeeb to learn a bit more about the Afghan culture and about Islam in general, in the hopes that that will help you to have further conversations in your congregations and in your communities to just help answer some questions and help your neighbors feel more comfortable being a welcoming neighbor. I thinking in the best way about people, I think, a lot of folks want to be a good neighbor and to be welcoming, but may not necessarily feel comfortable because there's just a lot that they don't know. And so we're hoping that providing some information might be able to help with that. So let me just introduce to you our speaker, Janan Najeeb. She is a founding member and current president of the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Coalition and has been a spokeswoman for Milwaukee's Muslim community to media outlets, government officials, interfaith leaders, academic institutions, hospitals, a wide range of other community groups. A microbiologist by profession at UW-Milwaukee, she has left her career because of the tremendous need to bridge the gap between the erroneous perception of Islam and Muslims in society and the actual beliefs and practices of the vast majority of the world's Muslims. She is in high demand, and so we're very fortunate to have her this afternoon. She has served as an adjunct professor at Cardinal Stritch University in Milwaukee. She directs the New Islamic Resource Center on the south side of Milwaukee, and I know she does speaking engagements like this all over the state. She's the recipient of numerous awards and recognitions, including the International Institute of Wisconsin's World Citizen Award, the Wisconsin Community Fund's Grantee of the Year Award. She was named or given a national award for activism by the Council on American Islamic Relations, ACLU's Special Recognition Award, as well as being named by Wisconsin Woman Magazine as a leader making a difference. And I did just see on Facebook that she was also just recently named as the Person of the Year by the Milwaukee Rotary. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
That's right. Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Well deserved, knowing all that you've done. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to you, Janan, and you can take it from there. So thanks again for being with us today. We're very fortunate to have this time with you.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, and thank you, Brianna, and all of you for joining this afternoon. We were talking about, everyone's zoomed out these days, and so the fact that anybody comes on Zoom anymore is great. So I feel honored that all of you are here. Thank you very much, and thank you for really looking forward to learning more about the Afghan community and about some of their practices. In order to really be conscientious neighbors and really to help them out. I think it's so important to know more about another community and another group of people if we really want to find ways to assist them. So I am going to share my screen right now. Okay, I've got it here. I just need to hang on. I just wanted to run. Okay. As you can tell, I'm not super technical, so. Oh, that's the end. Okay, that's the last part. Okay. I don't know why it didn't start at the beginning. Sorry. Well, you all can read backwards, right? Okay, here we go. All right. Okay, so today what we're hoping to do is really just learn a little bit more about our Afghan guests, and the pictures, all of the pictures that we used are really photos that we captured from the programs that we have been having with particularly the children, but also some of the adults that have come here recently. So I thought I would start with just a very brief historic introduction to Afghanistan. A lot of people realize that the reason that, you know, Afghanistan has been invaded so many times over its history, unfortunately, is because it is strategically located. It really, it connects Europe with Asia, and it's in a very, very strategic location. We know that the former USSR invaded in 1979, which led to a 9-year war. You know, that really led to the breakup of the Soviet Union. So now we just pretty much have Russia. Unfortunately, that war became a proxy war where the US armed the Taliban. And so, you know, you can find photos of the Taliban being welcomed in the White House. So we did work very closely with them. September 2001, we all know the US was attacked by terrorists who trained in Afghanistan, but were mainly from Saudi Arabia. I don't think any of them were actually Afghani. The US and NATO began bombing Afghanistan after that, and part of the Afghan population supported the US mission and worked alongside them, those that were very anti-Taliban. Here's just kind of like a little bit of a photo just to show you kind of the countries that are around Afghanistan. In 2021, we know that the US withdrew, and it was a very, very messy withdrawal. It shocked, I think, the entire world. And within days, the Taliban recaptured Afghanistan in its entirety. And this, you know, after a 20-year war, which is the longest in US history, the entirety of Afghanistan fell in a matter of days. 114,000 Afghans were airlifted out of Kabul, 60,000 came to the United States, and the rest to other countries. And we know many of them came to bases around the United States, and Fort McCoy was one of the places here in Wisconsin that they did come to. And it held thousands of Afghans at the time for numerous months. Those that were airlifted out of Afghanistan represent those who worked closely with the United States, including as interpreters and army personnel, as well as those in women's rights, education, media, and high-tech fields. Just some statistics. Afghanistan has one of the youngest populations in the world. 42% are in fact under the age of 15. Only 10% have completed the 12th grade due to decades of conflict and lack of resources. This had not been the case, honestly, prior to the 70s. Afghanistan was had many educated people, a lot of culture. It is really unfortunate to see what it has come to. There's a greater number of girls than boys that don't go to school. And in the US, the Afghan population is heavily concentrated in California, Virginia, New York, Texas, and the DC area. And this is a result of the Afghans that actually came during the invasion also by the Soviet Union. Many of the more well-to-do Afghans were able to come into the United States. And so they make up a different category of Afghans than the new Afghans that came, because many of the earlier Afghans were really sort of like what they call a brain drain to the West. Many of them were highly educated and very affluent in their country, and they were able to leave. So refugees, although they might come to a particular state or be assigned to a particular state, once they are able to, you're going to see, and this is the case with all refugees, secondary migration, where they will leave and go to another state or another city due to maybe family connections. Possibly they have relatives there, or they get sponsorships, whether it's religious organizations or, educational sponsorships and opportunities, or for employment or economic options. And so we are already seeing some Afghans that were, for example, assigned in certain states that are coming to Wisconsin, and many also that are leaving Wisconsin and going to places where they have relatives, or they know that there are more Afghans present. This is just a couple of photos here with some of my board members, and then also with Congresswoman Gwen Moore and Congresswoman Elhan Omar from Minnesota. This is when we sent boxes of supplies to Fort McCoy. And we were one of the only community organizations that actually was invited to be briefed there at Fort McCoy. Now, the Afghan community is really a culturally rich and diverse community. One of the things that always concerns me whenever we talk about countries and people that have suffered due to war and due to oppression. And, we kind of look at them as victims, or we look at them as sort of, we have a certain image of them that I think is often unfair. These are individuals that really come from very rich cultures, and Afghanistan is no exception. Its culture is really reflective of the countries that border it. And so you will find aspects of Pakistani culture, Iranian culture, cultures from the former Soviet republics, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and even China. And you will see that reflected even in the faces, in the way the diverse kind of appearance of the Afghan people. There's these many different countries have had a great influence on culture and on the language. So you will see it in the clothes, in the food that they eat, even some of the practices as far as holidays that they celebrate, and the languages. So many of the individuals that I'm running into will tell me, oh, I speak 4 languages, and it's 4 languages, and it is reflective of the fact that many languages are being spoken there. It is a patriarchal society, and this is unfortunately something that we see in particular whenever countries have dealt with decades of poverty, decades of war. The first people that always suffer are the women and the children. And regardless of what culture, what religion, countries like that tend to start leaning patriarchal. And Afghanistan is definitely has a more patriarchal system. So men hold primary power, particularly in the villages and in the rural areas. That is particularly the case. There is great respect, though, for traditions, including modesty and respect for elders. You have many tribal groups. The Pashtuns are the largest. I think they make up about 45% of the country, followed by the Tajiks and then the Uzbeks. And they are very tribal with deep commitment to their particular group. And that's also part of the reason that we saw that there were certain groups that, you know, worked against the Americans, and then certain groups that worked with the Americans. Particularly the ones that worked with the Americans were the ones that had little power there, that were minority groups, and tended to not really have a say as much in government and in other decision making. As far as religion, they are overwhelmingly Muslim, 90% being Sunni Muslim, but 9.7% being Shia Muslim. Which is, you know, again, the minority. And this is a lot of times due to the area that is close to Iran, because we know Iran is one of the main Shia countries. And then about 0.3% happen to be of other faiths and a variety of faiths. And it is interesting to note that Whereas in the very first wave of Afghans that came to this country, although many of them were, I want to say, not very religious. They tended to be a lot more secular, but they were overwhelmingly Sunni Muslims. The individuals that were airlifted are overwhelmingly from the Shia and Hazari groups. And the Hazari also are kind of like almost an offshoot of Shia Islam. And so you can see that this is a minority group. And so it was a group that didn't have the same opportunities that the majority had, and so they worked very closely, many of them, with the Americans. So what are some faith practices that we want to kind of talk about? Not all are observant, even amongst many that that we see today. But the culture of the country is Islamic. So even if you're not observant, there are certain things that happen in the country. There's no pork there. Alcohol is greatly frowned upon, for example. But they might not really do their prayers. But for practicing Muslims, and at least quite a number of the families that I have encountered seem to be practicing. And so there will be the 5 daily prayers that are required to be done. And this has been a real concern for some of the families that have come here, the fact that so many of them are being kind of placed in a haphazard way all around the city. We notice this when we pick up the kids for the buddy program. You've got one way out here, one way out there. They're not really by anybody that they know. They're not close to any mosque. They're not close to stores and food stores that have the kind of foods that they want. And so there was, in the same way that they were airlifted in a very, unfortunately, kind of last minute haphazard way, I think there was just an effort to put them wherever there was a place available without real planning. And that can be a problem, because we are getting calls from places like West Bend. We're getting calls from places like Sheboygan, places where, maybe there's just one family, and they're talking about, there's an intense amount of depression. There's real difficulty, nobody that speaks their language. They're not eating. They're they're worried about the kids because, you know, they're not finding the dietary types of staples that they're used to. This was also a huge issue in Fort McCoy, in fact. You know, when we went to meet with them, one of the reasons that I had actually called on Congresswoman Gwen Moore, and I sort of, you know, kind of set the alarms, is because there was word coming out of there that there was not enough food. People were wearing the same clothes for weeks, the same clothes that they had been evacuated in. Imagine, you know, I mean, I still remember my kids as young kids. I swear that sometimes they were changing clothes 3 times a day, you know, and if we don't take a shower one day and change our underclothes, you know, we just feel like really icky. And so imagine having to be in the same clothes for weeks. And so that was in fact the case, but that was part of the kind of unfortunately poor planning during the evacuation. We've just been through Ramadan. I know that here the Muslim community had a number of what we call iftars, or events to break the fast, bringing hundreds of the families, hundreds of the Afghan individuals together to see the community and to experience a breaking of the fast. And so for many of them, it was a first time realizing that there are Muslims in America, and that there is a community here. Zakat, which is a kind of charity, many within the Muslim community, you know, it's a requirement, and many this year during Ramadan in particular gave their zakat to some of the Afghans to purchase, you know, purchase some needed items. Zakat is a requirement of the faith. We have 2 major holidays, and so again, we organized a big Eid festival this year, and so I know that the ISM had sponsored a number of buses and brought in quite a number, a couple of hundred Afghans, and gave them vouchers also like for food and things. And we had, you know, like a midway rides, and we had petting zoos and things like that. So it was the first holiday that they got to experience here. Modesty is also something that is practiced even amongst those that are not very observant. There's certain levels of modesty. And so also, you know, that's something that we try and explain to people that want to work with them, people that go into their houses. You know, we can't impose on anyone certain dress codes, but I think that especially when you're dealing with new people and you want them to be comfortable with you, a recognition that you know, that entering their home not in shorts and you know, coming in modest dress, not having cleavage you know, out there and things like that, this is just kind of, you would think, a little bit standard. So it is important to note, it was a little bit of an issue when we did the buddy program, because we had some high school girls, you know, that and boys that were coming to be buddies, and it was sort of a little bit uncomfortable, particularly for some of the moms and dads that came to observe what was going on, because they found it, you know, to them, it's like being half naked, and they didn't feel comfortable with their kids sitting with a buddy like that, for example. So of course, this is an education process. This is their first experience with the United States, and understanding that there's a wide range. People dress as they want, in the same way that they're dressing as they choose, you know. So but again, you know, our goal is to help them really kind of assimilate into this country and to feel comfortable. And I think that taking some of these things into account is really important. Another thing that I think is important to keep in mind is, again, as part of modesty, this concept of separation of the genders. And so I found it interesting that, you know, during one of when they went to the mosque here in the United States, and in most, actually a lot of Muslim countries that are not so patriarchal, you find that the women will just pray separate from the men, but they'll be in the same room, on the same floor, you know, they might be in that way. But the women kind of were very agitated, and they refused to, you know, they don't want to pray, and they don't want their daughters to pray. The idea that they would be praying in the same room with the men was something that they found just unbelievable. So so again, keeping in mind that you're dealing with a society where the genders really interact separately. So and I'm not talking about, you know, the very urban areas, you know, some of these you know, kind of businesses, hospitals, these types of things. No, I'm talking about more of the rural areas. And so the separation is very real, to the point that you find that, you know, if families even visit each other, the men will sit in one room and the women will sit in another room and socialize in that way. And so, you know, keeping that in mind, when you, for example, let me give you one example. We sent a guy to pick up the families for the kids for the buddy program. And the first time around, the families would not send the girls because this is a guy that is not related to them, and they didn't want the girls to be in the same car in such a, you know, closed space with somebody that was not related. Another thing that is a big practice, and we realized it when we invited there are about, I think there are 9-10 girls at UWM that are unaccompanied, and they were brought to UWM, is Nowruz, which is a New Year celebration. It's not a religious holiday, it's a cultural holiday, but it is also celebrated in Iran. And so particularly those that come from areas that are close borders with Iran, you find Nowruz is celebrated. And it's kind of taken a life of its own where it's celebrated in many areas in Afghanistan itself. So what are some of the languages? And it's interesting, again, it's based on where people, you know, live. So you have Pashto, that's the most common language. You have Dari. You have Farsi, particularly those that live close to Iran, because that's a language in Iran. And you have Urdu, which is also spoken in Pakistan. And so those that have, you know, as we know during the wars, about, what is it, maybe over 1 million Afghans fled to Pakistan, and some of them stayed there for, you know, more than a decade. And some stayed for 2 decades. And so you've got this mixing of all of these languages. And so there are those that speak multiple languages because maybe there had been intermarriage. But oftentimes those that speak Dari, for example, those that speak Pashto, might not understand each other. They're completely separate. And so when we've had the buddy program, we bring in a Dari interpreter and we bring in a Pashto interpreter. Some of the things to keep in mind, particularly around healthcare, years of war have led to significant malnutrition in this community. 41% of children have stunted growth, and that was actually the first thing that that caught my eye when they were first being brought off the base, and the resettlement agencies put them in motels. And then the motels wanted to kick them out because the kids were running all over the place because they didn't have any program. They didn't have anything to do. They were stuck in motels all day long. And so the resettlement agencies reached out to us because they know we have a library, we have teachers, we do kids programming. And they said, what can you do? And we said, you know what, we will bring them all here and we will have programs for them. And so during the time that they were in the motels, we ran programs for the kids because the motels were actually only about 1.5 miles down the road from us. And so for, I can't remember if it was a week or two, every day, the entire day, we had these kids. And some of the kids that I looked at them and I thought, my gosh, why are they sending a 3-year-old here? Why are they sending a 4-year-old? And then I'm finding out, no, they're actually 7 and 8 years of age. So without a doubt, there has been, due to malnutrition, stunted growth. And that of course, you know, it's not just a physical thing, that also affects learning and things like that. There is significant mental health challenges and trauma, whereas we're not seeing it as much, at least right now, with the children. Children are, it's just amazing. Children tend to be very resilient sometimes. We are for sure seeing it in the moms. We're seeing it in the moms, and we're seeing it in some of the dads, and it's manifesting in different ways. We have a domestic violence program here, a culturally specific one, and we have been actually called a few times already to discuss this with certain families. And we have to keep in mind that you know, serious trauma and PTSD manifests itself in different ways. In the DV world, or domestic violence world, we use the saying, hurt people hurt people. So people that are themselves hurt and suffering hurt others. So it is really important that we try to find services for these individuals. And I do have to right now kind of get on my soapbox a little bit. The idea that these individuals who, we were in their country for 20 years, and these are the ones that were helping America. You know, they're brought here as evacuee status, so they don't have all the benefits of what you would have if you are categorized as a refugee. Whereas when we had the issue where, you know, when the invasion of Ukraine took place, the president immediately jumped up and offered 100,000 spots for Ukrainian refugees to have refugee status, which gives them all the rights and opportunities of a refugee. So it's unfair, I think, we still don't know what the situation of these Afghan evacuees is going to be, because they do not yet have refugee status, and they are being told that rather than becoming naturalized as a refugee where they would, you know, right away pretty much be eligible for their green card and things like that, they have to apply for asylum. And asylum is the single most difficult way to become an American citizen. And not only that, it requires many hours from lawyer time and legal assistance. So anyhow, enough of my soapbox here. There's been years of lack of medicine and healthcare due to, you know, many years. There was the 20 years that we were there, and then before that, the 9 years that the former Soviet Union was there. And so, you know, you're talking about a whole generation where there were constantly sanctions, always lack of medicine, lack of healthcare, just PTSD, the constant trauma of war, very poor maternal health, and so that's also something that needs to be, you know, that needs to be dealt with. The community, again, going back to the whole idea of Gender roles, they greatly prefer to have the same sex providers. Don't be surprised if they won't go to someone that's of a different sex. They also prefer overwhelmingly to eat halal foods. I remember for the buddy program when we first brought lunch for everybody, you know, they ate the rice and all the meat went into the garbage. And I'm like, oh my, excuse me, oh my God. They thought it's not halal. And so they, you know, and we didn't really think about explaining that to them. They just thought that because it's here in the United States, it's not halal. And so then after that, we had to announce to them that the meat that is used is all halal. You'll also find that family members will remain at a hospital with a patient. This is something they're very used to in their country. And in fact, it's not just particular to Afghanistan. We find this almost around across the board among in Muslim culture, where family members want to be there to serve the family member that is in the hospital. Diet, and here's a sample of our buddy program. They're having lunch there. So diet, again, halal, which is the Muslim version of kosher. It has to be slaughtered in a certain way with minimal pain to the animal. We're talking about having animals that are free range and treated well. And so halal meat, naan, which is the special bread. It's also used in Pakistan and India, Bangladesh. This is a staple. Rice is a staple. I remember the very first day that we had the program for them here at the center when they were in the motels. My librarian, who is a white American Christian, ordered pizza. They looked at it and they had no clue what this was. They were not interested in it, and nobody ate. And so we were told that they went home extremely hungry. And so then after that, we made sure to bring very cultural specific foods. And of course, many of you know, Muslims in general, you know, no pork or alcohol. Even, it's interesting, even Christians that live in predominantly Muslim countries don't eat pork. It's again, when we talk about the culture of a country, it becomes the culture of a country. So what are some of the school challenges that we need to kind of keep in mind? Of course, the cultural and linguistic barriers, you know, they're coming oftentimes, in fact, for sure, from countries where schools are separated by gender. Girls have their own schools, boys have their own schools. Now suddenly they're in the same schools. They're astounded and shocked by, you know, things like that they look at as moral issues, you know, hugging and kissing and touching between the genders, and wearing very revealing clothes and all of these types of things. The idea of you know, having gym where people are changing in front of each other. This is like what you call a major culture shock to a lot of them, and it has really led a lot of times to people not wanting to you know, be in the school. And then there's the linguistic barriers, you know, understanding what is being said. And not only that, but, you know, there's a certain lingo that particularly middle school and high school kids, you know, sometimes they use words I don't even know what they mean. They come up with certain lingo. And then, you know, again, as I mentioned, they're coming from countries where there was clear gender separation in schools. You find that parents don't always know. They've never gotten you know, letters home that they're supposed to read in Afghanistan. They're not used to parent-teacher meetings. This is not something they're used to. And then they bring, of course, with them the PTSD and the trauma and certain things that sometimes, you know, our people get used to here. Yeah, we were all here, and somebody in one of their cars, you know, where when they kind of rev up their cars and it starts just kind of making these almost like exploding sounds as someone is racing down. Oh my gosh, you should have seen these kids jump. You know, they hit the roof, because to them, everything they associate with war. So we have to be kind, we have to be gracious, we have to be, you know, understanding and know where they're coming from. And unfortunately, bullying is a real serious issue that many of the refugee kids have to deal with. And that was really the reason why we decided to focus on the children, because, you know, the parents will be resettled. They'll eventually they will find jobs. You know, the moms overwhelmingly will be at home in that particular society where they're taking care of the kids. But the kids are now they're really immersed in American culture, and they're going to be dealing with parents that don't know what they're dealing with and don't understand it and don't want to see their children forget their culture and their morals and their behavior and all of these types of things. And kids that are really trying to fit in and trying not to be isolated. And so it's a very, very difficult and fine line. And so by having the buddies, we were just hoping at least that that's one way we can kind of link them up with a friend, someone that is here in society, someone that's kind, that's someone that you know, that understands, can understand them, and that they can kind of talk to. And, you know, when you have someone that's kind of your age that says, yeah, you know what, that's cool, but you know what, people don't wear their pants like that. Or, you know, people wear their shirts outside their pants. They don't come in button-up shirts and you know, it's tucked in and belts and everything, and going to middle school. You know, so it's little things like that that honestly make a big difference. And so that's in some small way we're trying to help with that. So what are also some cultural practices that we need to know about the Afghans? You know, respect. They have tremendous respect, but also fear of authority. The idea that it's not traditional to look directly into the eyes of someone that's, you know, like a child looking directly into the eyes of their teacher or directly into the eyes of your doctor, particularly when it deals with different genders. That's absolutely considered a no-no. And so that's so different than our culture, where we're told, you know, have a firm handshake, look at people directly in the eye and speak clearly. And you know, we have a whole different culture. So we need to understand that when they're not doing that, it's not because, you know, they don't have respect, or it's not because they are, you know, the women, you know, are being abused or something like that, and we've heard everything. It's a culture. It's a cultural thing. Something we also have to teach, and we've been harping on this quite a bit with the students, is the concept of personal space. The concept that, you know, you don't just keep putting your hands on, you know, people around you. You don't just lean right up to them where you're you know, stuck to them because you want to hurry up and move the line. There's something called personal space. Also, you know, for people that are used to using their hands for eating, sometimes many of them, they don't know how to use a fork even. And so spoons are usually a lot easier for them to use. But you know, we have many times when they come here and you've got the rice and you've got the food and they're digging in with their hands. So something to keep in mind. Having a male female that are not related in the same room is not something that is acceptable. So even if you're going to have a meeting with somebody, if you're, let's say, a male and you need to meet with a female and discuss, always have another female with you. This was also a big issue that already came up with some of the volunteers that some of the other organizations have had and we heard about, where, for example, a female with her kids will be at home, and then a male is coming to bring some items, to the house, and her husband is not there. She doesn't have any sons there, and he's kind of irritated why he's not being allowed into the house to bring these items. That's not an acceptable cultural practice. So we need to kind of keep that in mind as we are planning things as well. So also the idea of having a God-centered language is very, very common, the alhamdulillah, inshallah, all of these kind of things. So, God willing, thanks to God, praise to God. This is very cultural amongst all Muslims. And so it's very, very, it's used often, and you will find it even slip into their normal talk when they're talking English. The idea of not changing your clothes every day. And we have found this not just among, of course, the Afghans, but among almost every single refugee community. You've been living in refugee camps, you've been living in war-torn areas, you've been dealing with poverty, you're in a country where half the time the water system is broken. You don't have the luxury of constantly changing your clothes and having a washing machine, that you can just throw your clothes in every day and all of that. So we need to understand where they're coming from. Many of them are not used to deodorant. That's a luxury that they didn't have an opportunity for, but things that we can always educate. So because it is something that is considered a way of being accepted in our country here, it is important to help them, to educate them that here, we tend to change our clothes every day. We have opportunities to wash them. We use deodorant. This is the kind of deodorant that we use, and just to help them become more familiar, because sometimes they don't realize what the problem is. Also, not shaking hands with the opposite sex. Once again, even when people are, close neighbors or whatever, and definitely not hugging a member of the opposite sex. It's very common to kind of put your hand over your heart as a way of, kind of acknowledging them in a warm way. There are ethnic differences among the refugees, so it's important to be aware of that. We have already encountered, issues where certain groups do not want to be with each other. Sometimes it's because one's a kind of educated, let's say more urban class, the other might be a less educated rural class. Sometimes it's because they're from certain tribes that have that have not worked well together, or whatever the case is. So it is important to know that there are differences among them. But it is a very warm and generous community. Anytime we've seen them, they always invite you for tea. They always want you to come in to share a meal. If they see you often, pretty soon you're almost like family to them. They're very, very family oriented, very community oriented group. I want to just here include just a little video that we made, really of just some of the work that we did with the and the Council of Churches was part of this as well, and many churches participated in donating the items and things. So So I did want to thank, the Wisconsin Council of Churches, because they also, many of the member groups really kind of raised money and continue to raise money to help with the ongoing needs of the community, of the Afghans. And these are some of the pictures again from our buddy program. It was so delightful to see the kids and to see how, little things, to come back and hear music and dance and sing and do artwork, how excited they were. And we were the very first outing they had after going from Fort McCoy to the motel. We were the first outing that they had had. And this is part of the buddy program. And the gentleman that's on the right picture, he is actually one of our interpreters, and he knows both Dari and Pashto. And we've brought in different programs for them. These are like from the mad science, and we brought artists to do programs with them, so to try and keep them occupied and feel that there's some kind of sense of normalcy. We had them do dream catchers a few weeks ago, and that was such a hit with them. And we've also had some teachers that have volunteered their time, ESL teachers and others, to help during some of the sessions to work on English skills. These are some of the team building activities and crafts that we have been doing. So thank you. Wow, I didn't expect it was going to take an hour, but so yeah, if any questions you guys have, I'm sure there's a lot of things that I didn't get a chance to cover, but please feel free to ask whatever it is you'd like.
So we've got a couple questions in the chat. And so I can read those off to you. Our Afghan ministry team is finding that the Afghan parents don't understand the school system for their children. So it's difficult for them to engage with schools about an education path for their children. We have 4K, 5K elementary, etc., divided up into school districts. Do you know the typical Afghan system? Like, do they have pre-elementary and elementary and kind of that system?
Yeah, it's unfortunately, particularly after many of these wars and in the rural areas, which the significant number, I want to say about up to 80% of the individuals that are here are former Army families, and many of them are coming from the rural areas. And so not only do they not have a very effective school system, you will find that many of the moms in particular are illiterate. Or they have had like maybe a 4th grade education. And so I think it's really kind of asking too much of them to start kind of planning a route for their kids. I think what's going to happen is that eventually their kids are going to plan their own route for themselves. I think that right now it's more about helping them to learn English. It's helping them to know at least, to get their kids out to school on time, to make sure that, that their homework is done, and you use interpreters to help them understand that. And if, notes are coming home, it would be really important to have an interpreter to work with to at least go over that. But I think a discussion needs to be had with the teachers that, you don't go from 0 to 100 overnight. It's a very step-by-step process. It takes patience. And you know what? You might not get that far with the parents, but I guarantee you, just wait till these kids have a couple of years of school under their belt. We've seen it with the Somali kids. We've seen it with the Syrian kids. We've seen it with Iraqi kids. Pretty soon they're the interpreters for for their parents, and they're the ones that are pushing things. And I was the other day I was at UWM commencement, and I honestly, my tears started flowing because I saw a couple of the Burmese and Rohingya girls that came from families that I never ever imagined, if you know what some of them went through. And here they're graduating from UWM, you know what I mean? And so this is kind of the story of life. And unfortunately, these are not people that brought war upon themselves. They had nothing to do with the war. It was imposed upon them. And so the least we can do is try and help them kind of move forward, and assist them.
Thanks. The next one is, Wesley says, unsurprisingly, our northern college town seems far out of the comfort zone of the expectations of the group of men who settled here. It's not clear they're comfortable getting out and about to build community connections. From your past observation of secondary migration, how likely is it that we will succeed in becoming sufficiently welcoming that they will stay? We hope they will succeed in bringing their families from overseas. Do statistics suggest they will likely just move to an area with a larger Afghan community when they can?
Yes. The only thing that will prevent that will be kind of like the community that we have of Somalis in Barron, Wisconsin, of all places, Barron, Wisconsin. There's a community of several thousand Somalis because they have a factory there that employed them, and they didn't bring one or two families or a couple of people. They literally brought dozens of families and then, and created opportunities for them. So now they've got like 2 mosques there that they've built, and they've got, ethnic food stores that I don't know how the heck they got it over to Barron, Wisconsin, but I'm sure where there's a will, there's a way. And so they're very comfortable out there, and they're raising their kids, and they're very happy. They're very happy out there. But, no one wants to be isolated. We talk about, equity and inclusion, and I've worked for so many decades in the fields where we talk about, the one Black kid that is living in a rural area and feels isolated. Is it valuable for that person to continue to live there because they're bringing some kind of diversity to that town? Or are we asking too much of them, and it really would be better for their own self to be in an area where they have people that they can identify with? It takes a really, really special person, and I think someone that's almost super tough to kind of want to be out on their own. And I think it's that's where I wonder when there's a few individuals that are brought to an area where there are no other people from their background that they can talk to, that they can, interact with. I mean, imagine how we would feel, honestly. So that's where it almost makes more sense to maybe start by trying to bring a bunch of more families so that they feel that there's some sense of community where they can at least, cook together or do something together, have some gatherings together, dance to their music, speak their language, do some of these types of things. But to expect them to be comfortable when they feel so isolated, I think that's asking a lot, honestly.
For sure. So this is another one kind of on culture of, are there extended family clans in traditional culture? And the person's asking, like, kind of like in the Hmong culture, how you have clans of people. Is that true in Afghan culture as well?
It is usually, yes, that is, but I don't think that's a case with these evacuees, because you have lots of situations where the husbands came and their wives and children are still overseas, for example, they're still stuck somewhere. You have many families where only certain members of the families are here. We have, for example, like the 10 girls at UWM, none of them, they literally were evacuated from their college, and you know, none of them have family members here. They're all with host families. And so to have that extended family, that's going to be a heck of a long time. Right now, it's really more about them getting settled with and having a sense of community, and probably, you know, trying to reunite with their immediate family. But it's almost, but it is traditional in most Muslim families to have sometimes extended families. It's not unusual to have like in-laws living with you, or elderly relatives living with you, having, you know, a mother or somebody that's, you know, in that situation. You're not going to find them putting them in retirement homes. It's just not a tradition. But I think we've got a long way to get to that here. I think they're still trying to find their feet.
So a question on language, and wondering about like language differences, because there's all the different languages everyone or that people speak, and wondering if the differences are kind of like, you know, you get Spanish in Cuba versus Spanish in Spain, like that difference, or is it like Spanish and French? And
It's yeah, it's you know, there are some that have similar, maybe some similarities in some words, but it's more than Spanish and, you know, you know, a Cuban Spanish and another Spanish. Sometimes it's a completely different language, you know. And I see even one of the interpreters that we use, that's a Dari speaker. She has no clue when they're speaking Pashto. She completely has no clue.
definitely talks the difficulties that can happen.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
communication.
definitely.
And
Yeah, because, you know, you have to keep in mind that people have been living in certain parts of the country, and maybe that entire area and region, you're talking about tribal kind of areas. And so they tend to speak, you know, that particular language, you know. It's really more the people that are in the cities, because they have had an opportunity to interact with a variety of different people. They're the ones that we're finding know multiple languages. You know, some come in and say, I know 4 languages, I know 5 languages, for example.
so the last question I have, if anyone else has a question, go ahead and throw it in the chat, or we can invite you to unmute and you could ask a question. But I've got one more here that says, our church delivered donations to 8 families and we had a chance to stay for tea and sweets. I was surprised to hear that one family was being placed in an apartment where rent was over $1,400 a month and the main provider made only $15 an hour. Sponsorship will end. What kind of help can this family apply or get? The hostess was worried, understandably so.
Yeah, and that's a real concern. In fact, there were a number of families here that were put in apartments that are, you know, and it's not like it's almost like a business. I hate to say it. It wasn't even as if they got, I mean, if I'm paying $1,400, I would think in Milwaukee, that should be a super luxury apartment. But I'm talking about really crappy neighborhood with lousy 2-bedroom apartment. And they're paying, you know, and they've got like one family is 11 members in a 2-bedroom apartment, and they're paying something like that. That's just that's ludicrous, you know. And so again, it concerns me, because what is being used is their welcome money, rather than trying to stretch it out for them to get on their feet. They're dumping it all into rent, because some of the resettlement agencies that brought them, you know, for whatever reason, some of them, that's what they're doing. I can tell you that previously, and for other refugees, they were always, because we used to get so many requests from agencies where they say, you know, we're looking at something in the range of $650, for example. Since when do you put $1,400 on an apartment? That's absurd. So my suggestion is as soon as possible to get them out of those apartments. And I think that's where volunteers can really, really help, is to help them find different places in which to live, and to be able to not kind of run up bills like that. That's unfair.
Yeah, I know affordable housing in the state. I've been doing some work just at the council and some conversations we're having, and it is such an issue. And then I know when we've worked with some of the resettlement agencies, people are coming so fast and they're so desperate that there isn't, and I think you kind of alluded to that, there isn't the time to be really intentional. It's okay, we found an apartment, let's go. But now that they're here, are there ways to help?
Right.
And I have a question. I'm the one who asked that question about the rent because it really ticked me off. I'm a social worker. I know a little bit about Milwaukee. I've been working there in poor neighborhoods and not so poor neighborhoods, etc. But I'm just wondering if once the agency locates or secures an apartment, does the refugee family have an input? Can they turn it down? Are they able to look at the apartment or homes first before they agree to it? Or is it just like you don't have a choice, you move in and that's it?
Yeah, usually the agency is the one that chooses the apartment. And in fact, sometimes they will then bring, whatever it is, to the mattresses, whatever. And then the family arrives, and if they, they try not to put them in a motel, they try to directly put them into the apartment. So it's the responsibility of these resettlement agencies. And I'm going to be really frank, because I have worked with a number of them. Some of them are really putting effort. Some of them are very short-staffed and are not putting any effort. And some just want to kind of like get their numbers done. And it's really, I think we need to, I think we need to take this seriously, because we're just going to have a bigger problem when we have all of these families suddenly, they still, they're making, like you said, they're making what, $13 an hour, $15 an hour, and they've got, 9 kids, for example, and they're paying $1,400. What are we going to expect? What kind of success is that?
Well, I understand it's hard to find apartment that is affordable in a relatively low crime neighborhood. But when I heard that, I was really appalled, because I think it's one thing to place a family in a so-so neighborhood where the rent is at least affordable or somewhat affordable, because it's easier. I think it's easier to work yourself up. Okay, you kind of accept a job here, maybe you improve yourself over a few months and stuff, and then you can have a higher income. Then it's easier to move out of that neighborhood, because of course nobody wants to live in a high crime neighborhood permanently. Let's face it, that's the way it is. I wouldn't want it either, no matter how nice a house is. But it was just like, how, if you start out with that high rent, how can you avoid eviction to begin with? Because we all know it's a whole different story with that one. And how can you move out of that neighborhood into a different area when you don't even have enough funds to make ends meet? You cannot set aside a number, money to use towards a more affordable housing. It's pretty much like it's a trap. It's very unfortunate.
No, you are absolutely right. And in fact, I was having a conversation some months ago, and I was saying, what might be a good idea is if somehow we could do some kind of fundraiser just to get security deposits for these families, because even if they're able to come up with 1 month's rent, they don't have that extra to put a security deposit, but again, there just needs to be more conscientious effort by the resettlement agencies when they're putting people in these apartments. And granted that when they first came, it was fast and furious, and people were whatever. But I think now that we're knowing that people are still going to be coming, there should have been, now it's been months, we should have a system down. But a lot of these places still haven't hired enough people to do the work, you know?
I think you're absolutely right. I think there needs to be a system in place. And I wish I could point to a document that describes that kind of system that allows these people, now that they're there, they need to move somewhere where that's affordable, that it meets all the other requirements. And frankly, we haven't found any good options for doing that. I would welcome somebody putting it together.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I just want to echo and affirm everything that's been said so far. This is such a challenge. And I know, part of this is also the fact that resettlement in this country was, absolutely decimated during the previous administration. And, that led to a real gutting of the infrastructure and the staff of all these agencies. And so, they were looking at, huge increase of the numbers under the new administration, plus the crisis of all of the Afghans that were being airlifted over and brought in. And so they had to move very quickly. They just had to, they really did not have that luxury or necessarily the staff, as Janan was saying. So I think this is a really important conversation. And Janan, I've just been working with Brianna in the chat a little bit. I think we need to have a little more conversation about this, maybe the three of us, to see what opportunities there are, because, it's hard to fault the agencies for getting folks into something more permanent as soon as possible. But just given the reality of, what the pandemic has done to the housing situation, an increased rent everywhere is just really challenging. I do know of one agency in Wisconsin that actually paid double security deposits to help landlords be a little bit more gracious with their refugee tenants. And then that also allows those tenants to receive a double security deposit back when they move out, to give them a little extra. So there are some creative efforts that are being taken. But it's been a challenge. And I don't think, to your point, Dennis, I don't think anybody has an answer for this. You're in the Madison area, I think, and you know as well as anybody how challenging it is to find, housing that one can actually afford to live in on a low income. So.
But what kind of consequences would there be if, I know they are supposed to find housing within 2 weeks upon arrival, but and I know it's kind of state regulations, but what kind of consequences would they have gotten if they had taken more time, or if they would take more time? What happens after the 2 weeks are gone and we don't have housing for a particular family? What does the state do in that case? What are the consequences?
My understanding of how the system works is they aren't really assigned a case until they have housing secured. And so, up until about February, the agencies the government wouldn't send them anybody until they could say we have an apartment. So they were simply trying to find housing as fast as possible, which meant some of them were expensive. And then, then in February, when the government decided to close the bases down, they just sent everybody out. So you had a lot of families that were in hotels. And so then it's, the difference of, do you have a family of, 8 to 10 people living in a hotel room, for 2 weeks, 6 weeks, however long, or do you try to get them into a situation where they're in an apartment and, hopefully figure things out later? So it's a problem. Our system wasn't really set up to do this even in the best of times. And like I said, the previous administration really did a number on our infrastructure, and then all the compounding realities of the pandemic have just made everything harder for everyone.
The resettlement agencies paid for housing for 3 months, but at the end of the 3 months.
The hope is that they have employment by then, but it's hard. And it's catch-22, because you want them in a city where they have access to resources and public transportation, but that also makes housing more expensive. So
Yeah.
It's
And
challenging.
they're given a specific stipend. So, you know, if you find, let's say, if you were able to find low income housing, you might be able to stretch it to 6 months, as opposed to if you're paying $1,400, you might be able to only stretch it to 2 months, you know?
Yeah.
So it is,
Yeah.
it's a difficult situation.
Yeah.
It really is, you know?
And,
Yeah.
and my understanding with the Afghans is that the funding is even different family to family, because it's based on, you know, the number of adults, that might include adult children, you know, the number of kids, you know, so, you know, one family of so many people might have a different amount to work with than another family of the same number based on what the ages are. So that also creates some challenges for the agencies trying to figure out equity with all of that. We could talk about this a long time, but I know that we want to wrap this up. I do have one final question for Janan, and that is, what can we all do to help support you and the work that you're doing at the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Center? I know that we have, you know, a number of folks on the call, and we'll probably have people watching the video later, who are in your area. I'm going to go ahead and put the link to your website in the chat so that people can see that. But are there any, you know, programs or opportunities that you would like for our viewers to know about?
Yeah, we of course have the buddy program, and we're hoping to now during the summer to expand that. We're always looking for volunteers. We're always looking, you know, for assistance, particularly ESL teachers that, you know, that have a couple of hours they want to volunteer, even a few hours a month. That's really, or someone else, you know, that's really helpful. If anyone's interested in helping to drive some of the families, that would be great. We're also starting a program that's specifically for the women. We're working actually with a public school to create a sewing lab. Many of the Afghan women know how to sew, and so we thought that this would be a great opportunity for, first of all, like fellowship, to get together, because many of them are very depressed, and so they get very excited when they're in the same place with each other, and then they can do something. So what we've been doing, the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Coalition, is we have some, we had a couple of sewing machines, in fact, that were donated, and we gave them specifically to the women that we know sew, and then we paid for fabric. And they're just as happy as can be. And so, and we're hearing that more and more of the women, this is like a skill, many of them, particularly from rural areas, that they have. And so we're hoping to have an actual, you know, we're working on it, and it's very close to happening, a full-fledged program, and that would be great. So anytime, of course, volunteers, any suggestions people have, donations are always great. We have a separate fund that's specifically for the Afghans, and no, you know, we don't take any administrative fees out of it. It's specifically whatever comes in goes out. In fact, the other day we took a family of that family of 11, you know, they had been for quite a while talking about that he's barely making ends meet, paying the rent and all of that. And so we took them, actually the family, to Walmart, and told them to pick up the items that they really needed, that we knew they couldn't buy. And we spent $650, you know, for them to get some items that they needed for their kids and things. And at the end of the day, that's all you can do. You know, what can you do? But I think we also need to kind of get on our elected officials and tell them that let's get them refugee status, because that expands the number of months that they get rent payment, that expands the amount of time that they will have food share, you know, and they deserve to be on refugee status.
Absolutely. And we do have legislation for that, the Afghan Adjustment Act.
Yeah.
And it's sitting on a shelf. It was rolled into the Ukraine bill by the Biden administration, and then some senators had it excluded before it passed, and so it's back on the shelf. And there's not a lot of optimism that it's going to be taken up on its own. Hopefully, it can tag along on another, you know, larger bill going forward. But time is running out, so yes, definitely call your people and do what you can to urge the immediate passing of the Afghan Adjustment Act. It would make a huge difference, and all they have to do is pass it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Janan. Thank you for your time with us, for sharing all of your wealth of information, and you're so articulate in your presentation. And so we so appreciate just the way you're able to lay all that information out for us in such a quick period of time. I know I learned a lot. And this is not my first time, stepping into this. So it's great to always walk away from something like this with new information and new knowledge. I appreciate all that you're doing in the community and all that you are able to do with us. Thank all of you for your time this afternoon, and for those of you watching this on demand later. Thank you for taking the time to sit in and listen. And like I said at the beginning of the call, we'll make sure that this is available on our website and through our newsletter. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Well, thank you very much. And I do want to say that, if at any time any of you have questions or concerns and you feel that maybe we can answer some questions, we're always available. So don't hesitate to contact us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.